Hello, this is Arit with Arit Developer Academy. And I wanted to, so I have been a software engineer now for a little over 2 years. It will be 2 years. It will be 3 years in March. No, it will be 3 years in February 2022. Okay. Anyway, so almost 3 years. And just the journey from being a junior engineer to now, I guess, more a mid-level engineer, I've learned a lot. And one thing that I struggled with, and sometimes I still struggle with, is you may know how to code something, but a lot of the work we do is more than just knowing how to code something or knowing how to get something to work with code, right? You have to think of optimization. You have to think of readability. Things like maintainability of the code is important. And the process that I've been through to increase my competencies in those areas hasn't been linear by any means. And so, content for my channel, content for my newsletter, I really have chosen to focus not so much on teaching or demoing how to build something or how to code something. I'm just so grateful for the plethora of resources, many of them free, out there that can teach you how to build a function or can teach you how to create an async call, for example. Those are great. But I've chosen to focus my content more on those more nebulous parts, like how do you refactor code to make it more readable or to make it or to optimize it more or to make it more maintainable. Because I know for me, that's where I've struggled, right? If it's how to do something or how to write particular syntax, Stack Overflow, you Google it. But I have struggled with, okay, my code is working, but can it be better? Can it be cleaner? Can it be simpler? That's where I've struggled, not just getting it to work. Anyway, so I recently faced one of these how do you improve the code scenarios at work, and I thought it would be a great example to share with the tech community, particularly like early career developers like myself, right? I thought it would be helpful to kind of show my thought process and kind of how I came to like realizing that the refactor was necessary and the steps that I took to actually do the refactor. So I hope it helps at least one of you. Okay, well, let's get started. So this is the forum application. So my company forum, we build community software. And so I have my local development version running, and the work is actually in the admin portal. So like the administrative portal behind the actual forum. So let me show you what I mean, just for those of you who may not know. So this is the actual forum. So this is what the members see, right? Like you have your posts and things like that, right? But I am working in the admin, so the behind the scenes, so to speak. All right. So the functionality that I was tasked with was to make certain destructive actions async and to change the flow of those actions. And I'll show you what I mean. So for example, for badges, where you award badges to users, badge achievements. And so initially, when you clicked, if you wanted to remove a badge from a user, if you clicked this button, we would just have the confirmation dialogue. You know that dialogue that pops out and asks you, are you sure? That's what we had. And so my job was to refactor that flow to make use of a modal. And I'll demonstrate real quick what that looks like. So you click remove, and now we have this confirm changes modal. And you need to type in the confirmation update in that field, and then you confirm your changes, and you see the record is gone, and you get this temporary snack bar, like in the bottom right, telling you that it was deleted, right? And then it goes away. So we didn't have that. We had just the confirm dialogue asking you, are you sure? And then you said, okay. And then there was a page refresh, and then the record would be gone. And so my job was to make that process async, utilize the modal that you saw, and the whole process be async. So I wanted to show it to you in the front end. And so I did that for badges, and I did that for, one second, I did that for display ads, right? The destroy action. And I also did that for broadcasts, right? And so this is a broadcast, and there's a destroy action there. So those were the 3 use cases that I did that, I refactored and made async, right? Okay, so let's go now to the code, and I'll show you the code. I thought it was important to show you what it looked like on the front end first so that the code makes sense, right? Okay, so this is the code. We're not going to look at the whole file, right? I'm just going to zero in on the parts that are relevant. So this is my async function here, and it's called send to endpoint because I built this function to handle multiple endpoints in that admin portal. And so I wanted to make this function as general as possible so that we could reuse it over and over for different types of destructive actions with different endpoints. Okay. And so I have 2, I guess, attributes that I'm passing in this object: the endpoint where we're sending the request, and the ID of the item that is going to be deleted. Okay. And so it's an async await function. And I'll say this, like I said, almost 3 years into this, I still don't have all my syntax, my code syntax perfect. So if I make mistakes, please correct me. I welcome correction. I welcome criticism. But, I may know what I'm talking about, but the syntax I might not be using the right terminology is what I mean. I don't mean syntax, sorry. I may not use the right terminology, and I do it boldly. I do it without any shame, because how else do we learn? So I'm just letting you know, if I use the wrong terminology, I'll do my best to correct myself if I catch myself, but if I don't, please correct me. Okay. So it's an async await function, and it basically hits the endpoint that we pass in along with the item ID for deletion. You see the method is delete. These are the headers. And this is where I handle the outcome from the server. And if the response from the server is okay, meaning it was successful, then I invoke this handle record function, and then I have my error handling down here. So let's go now to this handle record function, because that's where the meat of what is happening is. That's where it is. So here is my handle record function, and again, I'm passing in endpoint, ID, and outcome. The outcome is important because if you remember that that temporary message in the bottom, the content there is it's the text we get back from the outcome object, right, from the server. So that's why we pass in the outcome. And so the way I handled this initially, right, was with a switch statement. Because in my mind, switch statements allows you to have different cases, and based on which case was what, you can handle things differently. That's kind of how I was thinking. And so I said, okay, in the case of this endpoint, the badge achievements endpoint, because, and if I go back to the front end just for a second, I just want to show you with the broadcasts, you see that in the row that holds the title of the broadcast, we don't have that button. We don't have like a destroy button. So we're not destroying like a row, so to speak. We click into the broadcast and then we destroy it from the broadcast show page. This is a Rails application. So we are destroying the record from its show page. And so because we're doing that, for broadcast, we now needed to redirect to the list of broadcasts, right? And we had to do that even though we were making the whole process async, but we still needed to effect that redirect, because if we didn't redirect, then the app would blow up because the record, the show page record after deletion would no longer exist. Okay, so that's why if all the endpoints were like the other ones, and let me bring that up again, if all the endpoints were for records like the display ad, where it's just a row of information, and when I hit destroy, it's just a matter of deleting this row from the page, then I didn't need the switch statement. So the necessity of the switch statement came because that we had a number of endpoints that the record being deleted were displayed in different ways. I hope that makes sense. So that's the reason for the switch statement, or at least that's how I reasoned it in my mind. And so these endpoints are like the record is in a table, and all you need to do is just asynchronously remove the record from the table. There's no refresh. Everything's, great. But for this endpoint, the record has its own page. And so after deleting the record, we needed to redirect so that we wouldn't be trying to display a non-existent, we wouldn't be trying to display a page for a non-existent record. It would blow the app up. Okay. So in my mind, I thought that the switch statement was adequate for this implementation. But then in code review, after I put my PR up in PR review, one of my colleagues made the case, pun intended, made the case that what if we have like 15 endpoints to be handled, the record is handled, removed asynchronously. And what if we have 7 endpoints? In other words, this case, all these cases could end up being like, right? We could end up having like so many of them, right? And then all of a sudden, this switch statement becomes unwieldy. It's like, okay, how do we list it? Do we do it alphabetically? Like all of a sudden, it actually becomes more complicated than the issue it was trying to solve, right? And so what if you have a number, since you have this general send to endpoint function, which is great, but now you have all these different types of endpoints. And what if we have another endpoint where the record should be handled differently? And so now we're going to have 3 sets of case statements, So it was a great point. It was a great point. And I was like, you know what? They're right. This, this looks pretty for a few cases, right? But if we have 20 something cases, then this switch statement just becomes huge and becomes difficult to read. For me, it may feel a little easier because I wrote it, but for someone coming like 6 months down the line, it would be anyway. So that's where the refactor, the need for the refactor came about. And so I'm just going to walk you through how I refactored it, because essentially I decided to, instead of using a switch statement, I decided to use functions to handle the record depending on what the endpoint was. All right. So I'll show you what I did. So coming back down to send to endpoints, I have this, handle record. I'm invoking the handle record function here, and I'm passing in this object, right, with these 3 properties. And so I said, okay, what if instead of this function being a switch statement, what if this function held other functions, and those functions would be called based on what type of endpoint was passed into it. Okay, so that was the first thing I did. And so what I did was I said, instead of having all these case statements, why don't we put these endpoints in different arrays, depending on what type of endpoint it is, right? Is it an endpoint where we can asynchronously remove the record, or is it an endpoint where a redirect is necessary? And so that's the first thing I did. So I have the code here because I don't want to waste our time actually typing, because the point is not to type. But that's what I did. I went ahead and I first defined arrays according to what like how are we going to handle the record at this endpoint. All right, so I created an array for the endpoints where a redirect wasn't necessary and we could handle the removal of the record asynchronously without needing a page refresh. And then I had an array called redirect endpoints for those endpoints where a redirect was necessary. All right, so that was my first step. My second step was then to create. So in other words, you see how in the case of these two endpoints, we are, removing the record from the page and we are displaying that little message in the bottom corner. I decided to put these two lines of code in its own function, right? And so I called that function remove record async, and I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it here. Okay, let me fix my spacing. Okay, and so what is happening here? Missing a semicolon. Oh, that's weird. Oh, 1 second. It's in the wrong place. I'm working with Stimulus.js, and if you are inside the class, then you define the function differently. If you are outside, whether you're inside or outside the class. And so when you're inside the class, you don't use the function keyword. So that's why that was complaining. Okay, so this is basically just a copy. I just took these and I just put it in its own function. And I called that remove record async, like remove it asynchronously. And then for the code that handles a redirect after the record is deleted, I put that in its own function and I called that redirect after destroy. So I'm going to copy and put that here. Okay. And so I took this code and I put it in its own function, redirect after destroy. All right. And so then the handle record function, instead of containing this switch statement, I took out the switch statement because we don't need that anymore. And then I used a number of if statements. And I'm going to copy that and walk us through it here. And so, because I have my endpoints defined in these arrays, non-redirect endpoints and redirect endpoints, so then I do a check in my handle record function. I say if the endpoint is present in non-redirect endpoints, then we want to call the remove record async function and then return, which short circuits. It short circuits, so the rest of the function doesn't run. Now, if this condition isn't met, so it's not a non-redirect endpoint, then it checks. If it's a redirect endpoint, it's included in that array. Then we call the redirect after destroy function, and that gets handled. And then we short circuit it again. Now, if none of these conditions are met, then we handle the unhappy path, which is displaying an error alert, something went wrong, right? And so just by thinking through, because the switch statement worked. You saw me do it on the front end. It worked. So it wasn't a question of the code isn't working, but can it be simpler? Can it be tighter? Can it be cleaner? can it be more readable? Can it be more maintainable? And so what I've done here is I've effectively almost like encapsulated the different functional parts of what my switch statement was doing previously. I've kind of encapsulated all those moving pieces into their own functions. And so if something went wrong for redirect and endpoints, then I can localize my fix, right? I'm not having the words here, but I'm very excited because I was like, this is just so much more straightforward. And sometimes, like, I know for me, sometimes I think of certain functionality in code, like for example, switch statements, or just other things that you can do. Sometimes, like, your excitement to use them, is fine, but it may not be the best answer. Like, I was excited when I was like, oh, a switch statement is going to work here. And I was excited. I was proud of myself. I'm utilizing, this capability in JavaScript, but it wasn't the best answer. And it turns out that the better answer was just more functions, more functions, short functions, simple functions, each function doing just one thing. That ended up being the better answer. So everything was refactored, and just for posterity's sake, let's go and refresh our app and run through this again. And hopefully I haven't broken anything. No, I haven't broken anything. So we see it's still working. It's still working. So the issue was never, is the code working? It was, how can we make it better? How can we make it cleaner? How can we, in my mind at least, it's better even if this even if this array, had 30 entries. It's just an array. It's just an array. It's just holding information, and that array is being queried in another function. And so it's not all smushed together in this almighty switch statement, which makes the maintainability of this code a lot easier, in my opinion. So I'm going to stop talking there. I've been talking for a while, but I just wanted to walk us through what I'm experiencing as an early career developer. I'm beginning to see that, my journey, career-wise, I want to reach senior engineer status. As an individual contributor, I want to climb that ladder. And I am realizing that it's more than just working code. Like, that's the payoff when you're like an early career developer. My code is working. It's doing what it's supposed to do. But beyond that, you start thinking about the ecosystem where your code lives. The fact that this is an entire code base with multiple people working on this code base. How can I make the next engineer's job easier? How can I help them to understand my code 6, 9, 12 months from now? So that's where I am mentally. I hope that helps someone. I hope me describing my thought process for how I went about this refactor, I hope it helps, someone out there. So thank you for watching. Thank you. Bye.